I'll admit, I just wanted there to be 3 videos for once. Okay, so recall that Fodor's modules were domain-specific and cognitively impenetrable, informationally encapsulated, fast, mandatory, and bottom-up, while the executive was domain general and basically the opposite in every respect. There's been some questions for Fodor. Some of them are stronger objections than others. For example, it turns out that even though we showed some examples of cognitive impenetrability with optical illusions, a lot of responses can be trained via operant conditioning. You could probably train yourself not to flinch when somebody jabs you in the eye. Other people have argued that we don't actually need executive processing at all. Modules and ordering of modules would be enough. So Sternberg has argued that there are some aspects of the mind that might be modular and some that might not be. And in fact, there are some perceptual processes that really fit the modular view and others that really don't. So perhaps we might think anything that's automatic is modular, while anything that fits Kaplan's views, Kaplan's criteria, these things that can be trained away are not. There's other issues, right? So if these modules are fast and automatic, then there's this big question about how they fit together. I showed you the McGurk effect before. This is where a sight and a sound conflict, and your body or your mind automatically privileges the sight. So what happens when they conflict generally? Are there some modules that take priority over others, like sight seems to in the McGurk effect? Or do we make conscious decisions sometimes? Those are open questions in the modularity view. How did modules originate in the first place? So some of them you can actually tell really good evolutionary stories, right? Sight was processing before humans had a brain. We evolved from ancestors that had sight. Smell has been around since. That's essentially the first perception of any moving creature. So it makes some sense in some of these modules for them to have evolved to process information and maybe as other things evolve to interact with them. But then how does a central executive come about? How do you adjudicate between the different modules? The advocates of massive modularity argue you cannot, that there is no central cognition or abstract reasoning mechanism. Everything is carried out by some subsystems. So one argument for it is that our ancestors encountered a diverse array of problems, and each problem was specific in its own way, and each problem had its own solutions. But no single psychological mechanism could have solved all of those problems. Therefore, you needed to have many different mechanisms. How convincing this is, I'm not actually very convinced, but this is the argument, right? That we suffered very discrete problems that could be addressed with particular processes. All right, so that's the argument against Fodor's idea of modularity, but in fact, there's also, you can form counter arguments to the arguments, right? So if everything is modular according to evolutionary psychology, if everything is if we're just processes all the way down, then it seems like you come up with this basic problem of why why are there, why would evolution have selected for modules rather than knowledge? Why not have there, if you could evolve innateness in any way, why not just say this is the right option? In fact, it raises some problems when you start trying to actually spell out the evolutionary story, as we'll see in the next video. So there seems to be some issue with the story. You could tell the story, right? Like, you can tell the story, but the question seems to be that knowledge would be cheaper and easier to pass down. And there are creatures that can pass down knowledge of certain sorts, right? So there are some birds whose songs are innate. There are others that are not, which is kind of fascinating. So why not that? Other objections to massive modularity. One comes from Fodor, and that's that actually when you think about what the evolutionary psychologists are arguing for, they are arguing for something way more sophisticated than Fodor's modules. And being able to process what the results of those modules is going to require something more general than each module that's being interpreted. And those must be interpreted by something better and something bigger. And eventually you have an infinite series of processing that has to be happening, which seems implausible. Finally, so maybe there's information processing, but the first one was why not in basic innate knowledge, but if there's a domain general processing, that doesn't imply that there's domain general reasoning. Domain general reasoning seems to be required to be able to debate back and forth between the results of the models. All right, so let me try to wrap all of this up. There are two big views. Modularity of the mind, which divides mental processes into fast, quick, and automatic versus one that's very slow. And then there's the view that it's modules all the way down. It's processes that are somewhat hidden from us at every step. There's issues for both, right? The issue for the domain general view is, so the issues for the two-part system, the Fodor view, is that the executive seems hard to think about how it could come about. Even the modules don't seem like they're all of the same sort. The massive modularity view doesn't require their modules to be all of the same sort, but then it creates this regress problem of you requiring each module to be interpreted by a more complex module. And the modules already by themselves are much more complex than Fodor's view. The end result is that there seems to be evidence for both of these, but probably each of these is too simplistic of an overview of how our mind works. All right. Next video is on evolutionary psychology.